There is a specific kind of humiliation that almost only happens to people with too many interests, and you have probably been carrying it around for years without ever telling anyone. An announcement. The course, the language, the instrument, the business, the workout, the project. Maybe you tell your partner.
Maybe you tell your friends.
Maybe you change your bio on something, or buy the gear, or set up the studio in the corner of the room.
For a few weeks, you are alive in a way you forgot was possible.
You are good at it.
You are reading about it before bed.
You are imagining the version of you who finally becomes this thing. And then, slowly, the light dims. Not because anything bad happened.
Not because you stopped being capable.
Just because the thing that used to give you a charge stops giving you a charge. You start avoiding it. The gear collects dust. Eventually, somebody asks how it's going, and you make a small joke and change the subject. And inside, in a small private room nobody can see, you add one more entry to the running ledger of things you started and didn't finish. If you have to mentally count the entries on that ledger before you can even guess how many there are, this video's for you. Because the shame of being the person who starts and doesn't finish, who keeps doing this in front of people who love you, who has watched the small disappointment in their eyes when you mention something new again, is a particular kind of pain that almost nobody in the personal development world is talking about honestly. And it is built on a misunderstanding. A big one. About what your brain was actually doing the whole time. Take a breath, because here is what is true. You were not lazy. You were not weak. You were not lying when you said this time would be different. Your brain was doing exactly what brains like yours are biologically built to do, and you have been judging yourself by the standards of a different kind of brain that does not work the way yours works. Once you see the actual mechanism, the shame can come off. Not because you'll suddenly finish everything from now on, but because the thing you have been ashamed of turns out to be the wrong thing to be ashamed of. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through the neuroscience of why curiosity-driven brains specifically lose interest right when something stops being new, with the research behind it. I'll show you the cultural trap that turned a normal learning curve into a personal failing, and why nobody warned you about it. I'll name the deepest layer of this pain, which is the public version, the one that happens in front of other people, and which is the one almost nobody admits to feeling. And I'll give you a framework for how to actually carry your kind of curiosity without leaving a trail of shame behind you. Stick around for the third part especially. It's the one that has been quietly running your social life for years without you knowing. If you've ever wanted to delete your own browser history of unfinished hobbies, you've found your people. Subscribe and let's go. What your brain was actually doing the whole time. Let's start with the part most people don't know, because once you know it, the whole frame shifts. Neuroscientists have spent decades mapping out a very specific thing your dopamine system does, and it has a slightly clunky name: reward prediction error. Here's what it means in plain English. Your brain doesn't release dopamine in response to good things happening. It releases dopamine in response to unexpected good things happening. When something turns out better than your brain predicted, dopamine fires. When something turns out exactly as your brain predicted, dopamine barely fires at all. Read that one more time, because this is the whole game. The first time you sit down with a new instrument and you produce a chord, your brain has no prediction yet. The reward is huge relative to expectation. Dopamine fires. The first time you write a paragraph in a new language, same thing. The first time you ship a small piece of code, same thing.
The first month of anything new, your brain is in a state researchers call high uncertainty. And high uncertainty is exactly the state where dopamine fires the hardest.
Studies on novelty and exploration consistently show that dopamine signaling pushes brains toward whatever is currently uncertain, because uncertainty is where the most learning is available.
Then the predictions start getting accurate.
You can produce the chord on demand. You can write the paragraph without straining.
The novelty is settling into competence.
And the same dopamine system that lit your hair on fire in week 1 begins to quiet down, because there is no longer a gap between what you expected and what happened.
Your brain isn't bored with you. It is doing exactly what dopamine is supposed to do.
It is recalibrating its baseline.
It is moving on to look for the next place where it can learn fastest, because that is the actual job of the system.
Here's the part you weren't told.
This effect is real for every human brain. But it is stronger in brains that are more sensitive to novelty, more sensitive to dopamine signaling, more wired to seek out the next uncertain thing. That is, almost by definition, a pattern weaver brain.
A multi-passionate brain.
A brain with overlap to ADHD wiring, where novelty-driven dopamine is a load-bearing part of how engagement works in the first place. So when the new thing stops being new and your interest collapses, you are not being undisciplined. You are running a neurological program that is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. The drop-off in interest at the end of the honeymoon phase is not a sign of failure. It is the signature of a brain that runs on novelty, being asked to keep running on something that is no longer novel.
This doesn't mean you should never finish anything.
It means the way you have been blaming yourself was based on a wrong story about what was happening inside your head. Trap 1. You've been measuring yourself by a curve that isn't yours.
The cultural trap.
And it is everywhere. Almost every story we tell about mastery uses the same shape. Beginner struggles, beginner perseveres, beginner becomes intermediate, intermediate grinds through the boring middle, intermediate becomes expert. The hero of the story is the person who pushed through the dip in motivation. The villain, implicitly, is the version of them who would have quit. Every productivity book, every personal development guru, every commencement speech, every founder profile is built on this curve. Grit. Stick with it. 10,000 hours. Boring middle. Push through. For a brain that runs on importance-based motivation, this curve is roughly correct. The boring middle is a willpower problem, and willpower is the right tool. For a brain that runs on interest-based dopamine, the curve is a trap. Because the moment of motivation collapse you experience is not happening for the same reason the curve assumes. It is not happening because the work got hard. It is happening because the work got predictable. Your brain isn't failing the curve. It is being asked to run on a fuel it doesn't use after the novelty phase ends. And then, because you have absorbed the same cultural story everyone else has, you interpret the natural collapse of novelty-driven dopamine as a personal failing. You think, I'm doing it again, I'm being the person who quits. You attach the moral weight that the cultural curve attaches to it. And you quietly file another entry in the ledger. The shame is real. But the framework producing the shame is built for a brain that isn't yours. This is the first piece of weight you can actually put down. The curve that has been judging you was always describing somebody else. Trap 2.
the public performance of the new self. Now, here is the second trap, and it's the one that turns private pattern into public shame. Pay attention to what your mind does the first time a new interest grabs you. Not just the learning.
The other thing.
The thing where you start telling people. You change your social media?
You announce it at dinner. You buy the visible gear.
I introduce myself slightly differently. Some version of you in front of the people you love starts to perform the new identity before you have actually become it. This is not vanity. There's a developmental psychology framework for what is happening, originally laid out by James Marcia, that describes how humans form identities. Marcia identified that healthy identity development involves exploration before commitment. People who skip the exploration and lock in too early are in something he called identity foreclosure, premature commitment without genuine testing. Your brain knows somewhere underneath that you shouldn't commit to an identity you haven't tested. So you do something very rational. You try it on. You wear it in public. You see what it feels like to be the new version. The problem is the people around you don't see the trying on. They see the announcement. And when the interest fades and the gear goes into the closet, what they remember is that you said you were going to be this thing and then you weren't. And you watch them watch you. You feel them noticing the pattern. You start to brace when a new interest grabs you for how it's going to look this time. Some of you have stopped telling people about new things at all. You have learned to keep the new self private because the public version costs too much when it fades. Here is what nobody is naming. The shame of starting over is not really about you. It is about being seen starting over. Privately, a brain like yours can move through interests fluidly and gracefully. Pattern weavers in cultures without social media or in eras without performative identity probably ran through dozens of interests in a lifetime without anyone batting an eye. The shame is generated specifically by the social layer, the witness. The accumulated audience of every previous announcement watching you make this one. You are not ashamed of your curiosity. You are ashamed of the audience that has been keeping score on it. That distinction matters because the fix for the first kind of shame would be to change your brain. The fix for the second kind is much simpler. We'll get to it. Trap 3. The running ledger of unfinished things. The deepest layer is the one that runs in your own head, and it is the one almost nobody admits to. You keep a list. You may not call it a list, but it lives somewhere in you. Every project that didn't make it. Every course you abandon at Module 4. Every instrument that's gathering dust. Every business idea that you mentioned to one person and then quietly walked away from. The list is long, and somewhere in your nervous system it has weight. Researchers studying self-concept and motivation describe what happens when this ledger gets too heavy. The cumulative weight of perceived unfinished commitments shifts how you predict your own future. Each new interest, when it appears, no longer feels like a clean opening. It feels like the next entry on a list that already accuses you. And that meta-prediction, that this one will also end up on the list, can itself become a self-fulfilling pattern. Because part of you is bracing for the failure from day one, you commit less. You hide it earlier. You don't go all in, because going all in is what hurt last time. And the half commitment that results actually does make completion less likely, which adds another entry, which makes the meta-prediction even stronger.
This is the loop that quietly costs you the most. Not the novelty-driven brain. Not the public performance. The accumulated self-evidence that says you are the kind of person who doesn't finish, which then makes finishing harder in a feedback loop that takes decades to compound. By the time someone is in their 30s or 40s carrying this ledger, they often describe themselves to themselves in a tone you would never use about a friend. Inconsistent. Inconsistent. Can't be trusted with my own commitments.
Sure, you want the last line read back?
None of you would say it to someone you loved. But you say a version of it about yourself every time a new interest fades. And that quiet, decades-long self-talk does real damage to the brain you actually have, which would otherwise have run beautifully through all those interests without keeping the score. The ledger is the problem, not the curiosity. What actually works? So how do you carry this kind of mind without compounding the shame? 4 moves. The first is to stop measuring against the wrong curve and start measuring against your own. Mastery is not the only valid finish line.
For a pattern weaver, the more honest finish line is something like, I extracted what only this experience could give me, and now I'm moving on with that.
3 months of guitar is not a failure if you walked away knowing what a barred chord feels like under your fingers, why songs work the way they do, and how rhythm sits in your body differently after you've held an instrument.
That is real learning. The cultural curve calls it quitting because the cultural curve is measuring something else. You aren't quitting. You are completing a different kind of arc, one that doesn't get celebrated in motivational posters, but is actually how minds like yours move through the world. The second is to retire the public announcement until you've passed the predictability threshold. This is the simplest, most practical, most life-changing move in this entire video. Stop announcing new interests for at least the first 30 days. Not as a manipulation, as an act of self-respect. Give yourself permission to explore in private, in the high-novelty dopamine phase, without paying the social tax up front. If you make it through the predictability threshold and you're still in, then by all means tell the world. But what most of you have been doing is announcing while you are still in the dopamine-flooded honeymoon phase, where every interest feels eternal, and then paying for it socially when the predictable drop-off comes. The new rule is simple. Curiosity is private until proven otherwise. The people who love you don't need to know about every door you walk partway through. That isn't deception. That is appropriate intimacy with your own process. The third is to burn the ledger, deliberately. Not metaphorically. Actually do it. Sit down and make the list of every unfinished thing you've been carrying. Every course, every project, every business idea, every instrument, every language. All of them. Get it out of your head and onto paper. Look at it. Notice how much of your inner monologue has been written by it. And then, with full intention, rename it. What you have in your hand is not a list of failures. It is a map of a curious mind. Every entry on it is something you cared about enough to begin, which is more than most people can say about anything. Some of those experiences taught you something that found its way into something else. Some of them planted seeds you haven't picked up yet. None of them are evidence that you are flaky. They are evidence that you are alive in a particular way. Then, if it helps, physically destroy the paper. Burn it. Shred it. Make a small ceremony out of it. The ledger has to go, or it will keep running. The fourth, and this is the one most people skip, is to choose 1 or 2 long arcs on purpose, knowing that they will require something different.
Not everything in your life can be a 30-day exploration. Some things, a relationship, a body of work, a craft you actually want to live inside, need to be carried past the predictability threshold on something other than dopamine.
The honest framing is this.
For a pattern weaver, the long arcs of life cannot be powered by novelty because they will outlive novelty by definition.
They have to be powered by something else: meaning, identity, love, the slow satisfaction of mastery, the relationships that depend on you continuing. Those fuels are real and available to you, but they are not the same fuel as curiosity. You have to consciously switch tanks for the long arcs. Most people with brains like yours never realize they are trying to power a marriage or a craft with the same fuel they use for a new hobby, and then blame themselves when the fuel runs out. The fuel was never going to last. You needed a different fuel for that specific arc. Pick 1 or 2. Light them with something other than novelty. Let the rest of your life be the wandering it was always going to be.
One honest note. Before we close, the honest line. If the shame around starting over has moved past discomfort into something heavier, if you find yourself believing you are fundamentally broken, that you cannot be loved or trusted, that nothing you do will ever matter, that is not a curiosity problem, and it is not a productivity problem.
That is a place to talk to a therapist gently. The framework in this video is for the pattern. The deeper feeling deserves real support, and asking for it is part of taking care of the kind of mind you have. You don't have to earn the right to ask for help by finishing something first. You were never the person you were ashamed of being.
So let me leave you here.
The person you've been quietly ashamed of being, the one who starts and doesn't finish, who keeps doing this in front of everyone, who can't be trusted with their own commitments, was never the truth about you. That person was an interpretation, a story imposed on a kind of mind by a culture that didn't know any other shape for a learning life. You absorbed the story because everyone around you was running on it. You judged yourself by a curve that was built for someone else's brain, and you carried the running tally of your own curiosity around as if it were evidence against your character. It wasn't. It was never going to be. Your brain was doing what curious brains do. The honeymoon ended because honeymoons end, because dopamine is wired to chase uncertainty, because the same system that makes you alive in week 1 makes you restless by week 10. None of that was a failure of who you are. All of it was the natural shape of a mind that opens many doors. The ledger can come down. The public score can stop mattering. The shame can come off in pieces, slowly, the way old weights come off. And what you will find underneath when it does is a kind of mind that was always going to wander and was always going to be beautiful for exactly that reason. Stop apologizing for the shape of your curiosity. Start protecting it from witnesses who don't understand it. Pick 1 or 2 long arcs on purpose and let the rest of your life be the exploration it was always meant to be. If this finally gave you permission to put down something you've been carrying for too long, subscribe and join a community of people learning to carry their kind of mind with more honesty. And I want to know in the comments gently, what is one unfinished thing you've been judging yourself for that after watching this, you might be ready to rename? Just one. Drop it below. The people here will see you, and they will not be keeping score. Thanks for watching.
Now go let your curiosity wander, in private, without an audience that doesn't know what you're actually doing.